Today, we are diving deep into the wild story of Alphabet. Now, you might have heard of the Silk Road, but this was a whole different beast. We're talking about the largest, most notorious darknet marketplace in history, a criminal empire that, at its peak, was a staggering 10 times bigger than its infamous predecessor. So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll see how Alphabet basically copied legitimate online stores. Then, we'll get into the nitty-gritty tech that made it all possible. We'll even take a peek inside the marketplace itself. After that, we uncovered the one single tiny mistake that brought the entire empire crashing down. And finally, we'll ask the big question: what happens when a site this huge just disappears?
So how do you even begin to wrap your head around a marketplace for illegal goods? Well, the easiest way is to think about the websites you and I use every single day. The comparison is actually pretty simple. At its core, Alphabet was built to work just like an Amazon or an eBay. It had product listings, categories, prices, the whole 9 yards. The only real difference was total anonymity, which, of course, allowed people to trade in all sorts of illegal stuff. It basically took the Amazon business model and applied it to a global black market. Because, even in the criminal underworld, trust is everything. And having a familiar system of ratings and reviews, that was absolutely crucial to its success. And boy, was it a successful business model. At its height, law enforcement estimated that Alphabet was pulling in close to $500 million in sales every single year. Let that sink in. This wasn't some small, shadowy forum in a dark corner of the internet. This was a massive, global enterprise. Okay, so that brings us to the million-dollar question, right? How is a site like this even possible? Well, it all comes down to two key pieces of technology that, when you put them together, create the perfect recipe for an anonymous black market. First up, you've got something called the Tor network. Now, this was originally developed by the US government for its own intelligence agents to communicate securely. What it does is it lets users hide their location and their identity. So instead of your computer connecting directly to a website, your connection gets bounced all over the world through a bunch of volunteer-run servers. This provides a sort of cloak of invisibility for both the people buying and for the website itself. But being invisible is only half the battle, right? You got to get paid, and that's where cryptocurrency comes in. Currencies like Bitcoin let people send money to each other without a bank sitting in the middle. For decades, the cops have caught criminals by following the money. But with crypto, that money trail becomes incredibly hard to follow. And that completes the puzzle for anonymous commerce. So, here's the bottom line. Tor gives you the anonymous location, and cryptocurrency gives you the anonymous money. When you put those two things together, they create what one expert called the perfect storm, an entire ecosystem where a site like Alphabet can not only exist, but absolutely thrive. Okay, so we get how it all works in theory. But what was it actually like to visit Alphabet? Let's pull back the curtain and take a look inside. The first thing you'd notice is just how shockingly normal it all looked. The website wasn't some clunky, hard-to-use hacker site from a 90s movie. Nope. It was clean, it was well-designed, and it was incredibly easy to get around. One person who saw it said it looked quite legitimate. And that user-friendliness, that was a huge reason it grew so fast. And the range of products, it was just vast. I mean, yeah, most of the listings were for drugs, but you could find pretty much anything. We're talking stolen data, like Uber and Netflix accounts sold for just a few bucks, counterfeit passports and driver's licenses, super sophisticated hacking tools, and even weapons, like AK-47s, just listed for sale.
And this is what really drives home that whole Amazon for crime idea. The site had all the features you'd expect: 5-star ratings, vendor profiles with their whole history, user reviews. You could even read comments where people shared tips on how items were secretly shipped, hidden inside a CD case or something. It was an entire system built on reputation and trust, just for buying and selling illegal stuff.
For years, Alphabet seemed untouchable. Its founder operated with complete, total anonymity. But every kingpin has a weakness, and for the guy who created Alphabet, it was a simple, tiny mistake he'd made almost a decade earlier. The man behind the curtain was a guy named Alexander Kazes, a Canadian citizen who was living this life of absolute luxury over in Thailand. But online, he was known only by his handle Alpha02. He was a really skilled programmer who built the whole site from scratch, and for years, his real identity was a complete mystery to law enforcement all over the world. So, as the site just exploded in popularity and the money started rolling in, Katiz developed what experts call the Breaking Bad syndrome. He got a thrill from running the world's biggest illegal marketplace. He felt powerful. He felt untouchable. And that feeling of invincibility, that's what led to his downfall. He got careless. So how'd they get him? Well, investigators finally got a break when they found this old post on a tech forum from way back in 2008. The user's handle was Alpha02, and in that post, he listed his personal email address, a Hotmail account, and his real name, Alexander Kazes. This one single digital crumb, left behind almost a decade before he was arrested, was the key that unlocked the entire investigation. And this is the crucial lesson from his downfall, right? Your digital footprint is permanent. As they say, whatever is on the internet is on the internet forever. Something you post online today can absolutely come back to haunt you years or even a decade later. For Kazes, this one little piece of forgotten data was all it took to connect his real-world identity to his anonymous online persona.
And here it is, the final, fatal mistake. When investigators finally got their hands on the Alphabay servers, they found that exact same Hotmail address embedded in the header of the site's automatic welcome emails sent out to new users. He'd just forgotten to scrub his old personal address from the system's configuration files. That one piece of data was the smoking gun that directly linked Alexander Chases, the man, to Alpha02, the darknet kingpin. The arrest of Alexander Kazes and the shutdown of Alphabay was a huge landmark moment for global law enforcement. But in the world of the dark web, when you cut off the head of the snake, what happens next is rarely that simple. And just to put this all into perspective, let's look at the sheer scale of this thing. I mean, the Silk Road was a huge story when it got taken down back in 2013, right? Well, Alphabay was roughly 10 times bigger, with hundreds of thousands of active users and vendors. Taking it down was a truly monumental achievement.
But here's the thing. Shutting down the biggest player in the game doesn't just make the demand go away. What it does is create this massive power vacuum. In the weeks after Alphabay went dark, its users didn't just stop buying and selling. They scrambled to find new markets. So instead of one central giant, the whole ecosystem just fractured into dozens of smaller competing sites.
And that leaves us with this final critical question. The takedown of Alphabay was a victory, for sure, but it also shines a light on just how persistent this challenge is. When you take down a marketplace that has hundreds of thousands of customers, where do they all go? They scatter, creating brand new challenges for law enforcement and showing that in this digital age, the war on crime is this constantly evolving game of cat and mouse.